So today, have you ever met a victim in any of the businesses that you've worked in?
Hundreds.
Victims, hundreds of
Hundreds of
victims.
victims. Yeah. Well, no, let me correct that. Hundreds of people who think they're victims.
Yeah, exactly. So why do people develop this victim mentality? And, why do people become victims? I think that's a pretty good thing to think about, because certainly I've been accused of it in the past, which was hurtful.
Yeah.
So I've got a perspective on that. But what's the impact of being a victim? When you take a victim mentality, what's the impact of that?
Well, I think it's a completely negative mentality, isn't it? It's not one of ownership and accountability. It's a pessimistic view of events. This feeling that things happen to you, or life happens to you, and it branches out into other aspects of life as well. You find that if there's a victim mentality or a mindset in one facet of life, it kind of spills out into the others. It's quite a slippery slope from my experience, and over time it just shapes your interpretation of things, doesn't it? Shapes your interpretation.
Yeah, totally. I totally agree with that. And in the experiences that you've had, have you got any sense of why people develop victim mentalities?
I'm sure there's hundreds of reasons. In terms of general life, I guess. I always remember this sort of high leverage interview question that you use when you're interviewing, and it's how lucky do you consider yourself on a scale of 1 to 10?
Oh, right. Yeah.
And that opens the door for a much wider insight into that personality and the person that you're employing.
Yeah.
But I think normally there's a reason, there's a string of events that can be linked back that then cast a shadow over the interpretation of everything else that goes on in their life from that moment. It can normally be wound back, but it's very easy to fall into that and not realize, not be aware or self-aware that that's what you're doing. And it can have a real negative impact on others around you as well if you're in that headspace.
I just changed one word in what you just said, because you said it can have a real negative effect. I would say unquestionably and without exception, it has a negative effect on everybody that you're with. There's no possible way you can be in a victim mindset and have a positive influence or be regarded positively by anyone. And I know that from personal experience. And I think there's an interesting aspect of victim mentality as well, which is, and very often I've seen it in people who are pleasers. So it's like they don't want to appear to be the bad guy or the bad girl, or they want to be liked by everybody. So when there's a difficult decision or a difficult thing to be done or a difficult conversation to be had, what they'll tend to do is say things like, well, it wasn't my idea, it was so-and-so's, or I'm only doing this because my boss told me to do it. By the way, that was a trap I fell into, and I only ever made that mistake once. And so it's recognizing when you're falling into this victim mentality, I think is the hard part. Because obviously if it was easy, then people wouldn't fall into it. But I think the real problem is that people don't realize how destructive it is on your relationships and on your reputation when you actually act out this victim mindset. So could we flesh out what victim mindset looks like? If you're working with somebody who's got victim mindset, let's just flesh out all the different, well, as many as we can sort of identify the different ways a victim mindset shows up particularly in the workplace.
Sure. I think it starts with an outward looking perspective, doesn't it? Generally, from my experience, is looking at reasons why, or external factors that are causing a challenge or you know, a conflict.
Can I be a bit more direct? Because I think you've said that in a very nice way. What I think you're really saying is it's like people blame circumstances, don't they? Blame everything but themselves.
Yeah, they do. They look for other reasons, external factors. Yeah. Like I said, going back to the whole kind of luck aspect of things, you know, because you'll have, you know, people that believe that they can create their own luck. But you do have people that consider themselves unlucky. Yeah,
and it's very difficult to help people who consider themselves unlucky, because the people that I've met like that, they want to buy into that narrative and they want to keep reconfirming the fact that they're unlucky. So it doesn't matter how many opportunities you put in their way, they somehow conspire to self-sabotage so that those opportunities don't manifest, and then they can validate that theory that they're unlucky. It's a horribly destructive downward spiral. And I know I keep saying it, I've seen it a lot, but I really do. You know, even within the last month, I've seen people make decisions and leave jobs because they felt they were victims of decisions that were made in the businesses that they were working in, and they've moved for no good reason, apart from a sort of a bit of revenge for not getting what they feel was their due worth in the company that they were working for. You know, and that's never a good reason, and that only comes about because they felt they were victims. But it came about because they felt they were victims and they didn't have any mental strategies to get out of that. So blame is one aspect of victim, how it manifests itself. How else does it manifest itself?
I think avoidance is another as well. This whole sort of avoidance of reality. You know, in the workplace, you see people when they're victims, they don't ask questions, and they try and just avoid things. You know, so I do think that the avoidance, as much as blame is, you know, one of those aspects. I think, you know, the whole kind of burying your head in the sand is another.
And I think the extreme version of that is when you get just people just saying yes.
Just go along with it.
And it's like, well, you're the boss, you told me to do that. It's not my fault it didn't work. It's not my fault this happened.
Following orders.
Just following orders. I mean, my goodness, we talked about that before, and
exactly.
And how people will just fall into that trap. And of course, as if you're running a business, or if you're running a team in an organization, and you've got that sense that people are just saying yes, and they've got a bit of that victim mentality, then of course you've got to make sure that you don't fall into that same trap. Because then it's easy to say, and this is what I see a lot, and I'd be interested in your view on this. It's like when you get somebody who is in like sort of a leadership position, they've got a team or they've got a business with staff, and they feel like the team or the team isn't really like gelling. It's not really working in the way they want. What do they start doing? 99 times out of 100, they start blaming the team. Which is exactly what victim mentality is. So it's like, you know, they're not looking inwards and saying, what am I doing to create this environment and therefore have this team?
So here's an interesting one to throw at you then.
Okay.
Football. It's often heavily criticized for the turnover of management. You know, a team fails to perform, the coach is the first one to get axed, the players don't get looked at. And there's often this outcry around, you know, the players taking accountability. So what we've just described is actually the manager takes accountability and should be addressed. But obviously in football, there's this cutthroat, you know, certain teams particularly where, you know, they have a different manager every year because they don't achieve a certain level of performance.
Sure.
So what is the right approach there?
Well, I think what you've got there is the impact of big money, and the losses and the profits that can be made in football in one season are so huge, and the swings of like being successful one year and not successful the next year, you know, the money is huge, and the consequence of of not having the money to go into the transfer market means people make quick decisions. But I think, what I would say is, I think there's evidence, if you look at the football as an industry, particularly in the Premier League, that there is some evidence to show that the clubs that have stuck with their managers have actually shown some real resilience. And I don't know whether anyone's ever done any sort of research on it, but it would be interesting. And were Man United successful when Alex Ferguson was, well, not when he first joined, but he had that transition moment when things changed for him, and then they started to win. So was he a winning manager because he was a great manager, and there's obviously a lot of people who believe he was, or was he a winning manager because the people who ran Man United believed in him and gave him the opportunity to develop the consistency and have that consistent approach? Because he was successful, but he didn't win every season, and he didn't win every trophy every season. So there were times when he wasn't winning.
Which means they were always challenging, though, weren't they? I think that's probably the thing that they classify him as. What his team was always challenging and in contention for something. Of course, when he left, they weren't. They fell out of contention, didn't they?
Yeah, the counter I'd give to that, though, would be Chelsea with Roman Abramovich, where they've always been in contention, and yet he has, been ruthless in changing managers.
Well, they probably have a different one every year, don't they, more or less, or it levels out like that.
Yeah, but they've always been in contention. So I think sort of bringing this back to our sphere, which is small to medium-sized businesses and individuals on the career path. How does this play out with them? I mean, I would say most people in an ordinary job, most business owners running a normal business, they don't have that sort of annual pressure. They have a bit more leeway. So they don't. And obviously, if you run your own business, the only person you're answerable to is yourself. You may have a few people who've, lent you money, might have some shareholders, or something like that, or a partner, but essentially it's yourself. And if you're in the corporate world, and you might be responsible, you might have to report into a boss, and all of that hierarchical stuff that goes on in organizations, but essentially you're answerable to yourself. And I think this is the whole thing about the victim mindset. It's like when you get out of that idea, if you ever get into it, actually, a lot of people never even get into it, that you're answerable to other people more than you're answerable to yourself, inevitably you're going to get sucked into this idea that something else was to blame, the pressures that you were under. They wouldn't let me do what I wanted to do. If only they'd let me do this, I could have achieved that, but they wouldn't let me do it. All that sort of stuff comes out.
It's lack of control, isn't it? And ownership and control.
And the other thing that goes with that, which I've seen happen, I don't know whether you have, is like when you then get a switch of managers, and all those people who are moaning that they couldn't do the things they wanted to do, they get them a really open-minded manager, strong manager who's willing to give them that. They then back away from it.
Exactly.
They run away from that opportunity as fast as possible.
Well, the longer you're in a victim sort of mentality or mindset, the more your confidence and belief in yourself erodes, and that's generally what happens, isn't it? And so, when you've got no control, or you feel like you've got no control, I should probably say, it does erode your confidence. And so when someone comes in and gives them that opportunity, they will back away from it, because suddenly they're exposed and they've got nothing else to blame then, have they?
Well, I think that's I think that's interesting because I think when you meet somebody who's got a victim mindset, there's always something else to blame. You know,
Well,
it's like
yeah,
a butterfly flapped its wings in Bolivia, you know, and it's like, put me off.
yeah,
I, I used to watch a lot of golf. I used to play a lot of golf, watch a lot of golf. And I always used to laugh at the professionals when like they'd get really titchy about someone moving in the crowd and putting them off. And I always used to think, hang on a minute, you're professional golfers. If you can't get like the focus you need for that moment that you're taking the shot and that you're so easily distracted, that says more about you than it does about the. And at the end of the day, the hundreds of thousands of people who are going in to watch a tournament, they're paying your wages. You know, it's like, you know, you've got to give them, you can't sort of blame the people that are paying to watch you, you know. I suppose it's a bit like comedians with hecklers. You have to learn how to deal with hecklers, and you know, sports people have to learn how to deal with difficult people in the crowd. You know, you can't be like Cantona and go and drop kick people because they say something you don't like, you know.
Exactly. Well, tennis is another one, isn't it, where there's a big, you know, emphasis on crowd noise at serving points and things like that.
Yeah. I mean, yes, I get it, of course. You know, if there's dead silence and there's a sudden noise, you instinctively, there's not much you can do. You're going to react because you're biologically primed to react to sudden noises. It's a deep instinctive fear. In fact, it's one of the only I believe we're only born with 3 fears. One is the sound of loud noises, sudden loud noises. The second one is the fear of falling. So it's not the fear of heights, but it's the fear of falling. And the third one, which I've only just read about recently, is they now believe that we're born with an innate fear of snakes.
Snakes?
Yes.
How bizarre.
Because it goes back to our biological beginnings when we were living in trees. You know, before we emerged as humans, we were still part of the apes. And so we were living in trees, and snakes literally were our mortal enemies because, you know, they were hunting us in the trees. So there's some research that's out there now that seems to suggest that we all have this innate fear of snakes, and we learn to overcome it as adults.
Didn't know that. Learn something every day.
Yeah, well, hopefully, of course, we're talking about the real snakes in the animal kingdom as opposed to the snakes you can find in the business world, of course.
Yeah, yeah.
who probably deserve to be a bit more, we probably should be a bit more fearful of them. But so just sort of bringing this back, because I get frustrated when I can see somebody with a victim mentality, because in a way it's very easy to get out of it when you know what to do and how to do it. But most people who've got a victim mentality that I've come across, they don't want to get out of it. I think I mentioned this a bit earlier. They want to keep reaffirming their victimhood. It makes life easy for them that way. Have you sort of got any strategies for helping people to get out of victimhood?
Well, in terms of strategies, I think it's just that I do have like a 5-step process for overcoming that victim mindset, if you like. The first one is to find what the reality is. So, you know, ask questions, what's actually happening here, and seek the reality. Because I think too easy to begin with, people don't ask questions, they avoid the reality, that they can fight it, they start to blame, make personal excuses, and then ultimately they end in, you know, waiting and hoping, fingers crossed this works. So the first thing is actually seek the reality.
Can I just ask you about that? Because I'm not quite sure how that works. I think I know what you mean by seek reality.
Well, for me, I'm
not sure.
Yeah, for me, it's use the people around you, get different perspectives, find out what the truth is. I mean, we've talked about this before, where, you know, businesses lose touch on what's going wrong, you know, on the shop floor, if you like, or at the coalface. And it gets to a point where, you know, their ability to react to that is too slow. And so you've got to actually look for the most accurate picture you can get, and ask questions and get other people challenging and bring people in that have different perspectives.
Okay.
Because otherwise you're in danger of just having your own perspective. And if you are in that victim mindset, you know, how many people do we see blame market conditions, or
yeah,
you know what I mean? So
competitors, suppliers, exactly.
And they become obsessed with, you know, what's going on outside their own business and not what's going on within.
Yeah, I've even worked with excuse me. I've even worked with people who blame their own clients.
Yeah,
and that's the one that always gets me. It's like when you get to the point where you're blaming your own clients, then if you can't start looking inward at that point, you've got a real problem.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So the first step is always getting the complete picture, and seeking that reality. Second step is looking for solutions. You know, what can I do? You know, about that, and that's where people with a victim mindset, you know, it flips. Is what can you do?
Yeah,
they look at their team.
Yeah, that was the one. As soon as you said that, I just thought, well, all the people I've known with a victim mindset would immediately just say, well, there's nothing I can do. That's why I'm in this situation.
Yeah. So what can I do? And you know, the third step is owning it. Once you've got that reality and figure out what you can do, you've got to go and do it. You know, if it's going to happen, it's got to sit with you to do it, you know, and own it. Otherwise you're in that position where you're relying on, or you know, you're sitting back and saying, well, it's not my problem.
Something's just come to me there, Chris, because obviously we haven't talked about this 5-step program before, so it's new to me. So I'm just reacting instinctively to it. So what's instinctively just come to me there is my gut is telling me that shouldn't ownership be step 2?
Sorry, yeah, it is. Beg your pardon. There is a. I've gone arse about face here. So that would teach me from for looking up stuff while we're chatting.
Okay.
So you've got the first step, which is seeking reality. You've got the second step, which is acknowledging the reality. This is what it is. You know, we've got that complete picture. That's the way it is.
Okay.
Then you've got to own it, and then you've got to look for solutions. Okay. And of course, the fifth step is just do it. Get on with it.
Yeah.
And that's where there's a real. That's so that, you know, if you looked at a 5-step principle for a victim mindset and match them, they kind of get further apart from each other. The further down that process you go, because you know, let's get on with it and do it and get things done, versus, well, you know, if it's meant to be, it will happen. And they're almost like polar opposites. So so that was my mistake there. That's what happens when you have a bank holiday weekend.
I'm just glad you took ownership of it and didn't blame me.
Well, I took ownership. I didn't try and wriggle out of it or blame my list or anything like that. But generally, that's what happens. And so it's about seeking and owning, and not passing the buck and blaming. And you know, that's quite difficult to do. But although a lot of this sort of accountability thing sits with yourself, you know, use other people to hold you accountable as well, you know, to support that whole process. This isn't about because I know, you know, we've all worked with sort of very controlling owners who micromanage, and you know, this isn't about saying, God, you know, I'm the only one who can do this. I'm the only one who can deliver this. It's about using your team and the people around you to create that sense of ownership and accountability collectively.
But I think you've just hit on something there that is really common, and it's where the business owner actually says, well, I can't rely on my team, so I have to do this. This is why I'm working 7 days a week.
Yeah.
24 hours a day. It's why I don't get to see my family.
Yeah.
And of course, then, you know, the partner, whether it's, you know, the wife or the husband, is going, you know, why you were never around for family events? You know, I wanted to go and see my parents this weekend, but you were working. And it's always like that. And then you're into massive family disruption as well.
Yeah.
And it all comes about because the business owner is in this massive victim mindset, blaming his team rather.
Yeah.
Now, of course, there's a dynamic that comes into that, of course, which again I've seen and you may have seen, is like, because there's family problems, they then use that as an excuse. They use work as an excuse to get out of family events. So, you know, whichever way you look at it, you know, that's a victim mindset on either set. So it's, and so I think that 5-step framework that you've outlined, I think for anybody that is recognizing that they might potentially either be in a victim mindset or under times of severe stress, feel themselves getting sucked into that. So do you just want to run through it again? Because I do like it. It's just like nice, clear steps.
Yeah, the first step is look for reality, find out what's actually happening.
And the best way to do that
is involve other people, get perspectives, get different perspectives, and that doesn't have to be limited to your team. You know, look. You know, if you're running a business, ask your customers, speak to your competitors as well, get some insight into what's really going on. Because it's all too easy just to assume and then slip into that blame mentality, that victim mentality. So once you've got that picture.
And what if you're the type of person that finds it difficult to reach out? What if you're not, you know, what if you're a bit introverted, you're a bit shy, and you don't find opening up to those sorts of challenges of reaching out to people very easy? Have you got any tips for somebody who might fall into that category?
Well, I personally think then you find people around you that can open up and speak to people and get that insight. And you know, if you can't, you know, ultimately that's an obstacle you're going to have to do your best to overcome if you want to be truly accountable. But you know, if it's a real debilitating problem, then use your team.
So there's I don't know whether I've talked about this, but there's I wouldn't call it a model, but a principle that I've got that I think relates to this, and that is, in whatever situation you're in, you've got to identify what it is that you want to. What's the result you want to get? So if you're, let's say something's not working within your business, or something's not working within your career, whatever it might be. The first step is you've got to think, well, what is it I want? What is it I really want to achieve based on where I am right now? So your first step of searching for reality is crucial, because you've got to be able to say, well, where is it I am right now? Because without
that's the start point, isn't it?
It is. Yeah. Well, it's like reading a map without knowing where you are. So absolutely. But then you've got to say, well, where is it I want to get to? What's the result I want? And then what usually happens with people is it's like there's a whole bunch of negative stuff comes up in the mind, all the reasons they can't do it. And this is what I've done for myself, because I've had to overcome these barriers myself. Everyone does. But the way I did it was to say, okay, I might not be able to do some of those things now, but I've got to become the person who can do those things. It's like, because if you don't have that mindset about your own personal development, you'll always be stuck at where you're at. Because, you know, if you're going to grow in your career, whether that's an employed career or a business owner career, entrepreneurial career, you're always going to be faced with situations where your next move involves you doing something that you've never done before, or something that you feel uncomfortable with, or something that you feel is difficult, or something that you don't like doing. And all of those things you've got to overcome. You've got to become the person that can do the things that you're frightened of, that you don't like doing, that, you know, some cases might disgust you, but you know, there's times I've had to do disgusting jobs, you know, particularly when I had to clean out a sewer sometimes, which I sometimes had to do, you know. You've got to become the person who can do it. And I think that's the bit I would just add to what you just said on that aspect of reaching out, even if you don't feel comfortable. You've got to become the person who can do that at some point. So that's point number one. Yeah, I really like that. Cool. Point number two.
So second one is, you know, you've got to acknowledge whatever that picture looks like, and accept it. You know, this is the way it is right now. You know, because like you say, your starting point on the map, you've got to know exactly where you are. Yeah. And then you've got to acknowledge that. And I think this is a missed opportunity with lots of businesses where they don't acknowledge that reality collectively.
There's a very famous, I say it's very famous because I like it, but it's an old Henry Ford quotation, and I say it's famous because I like Henry Ford quotes, and so I read it a lot. So in my mind, it's famous. But I'm actually, as I said that, I thought, well, you might not have heard of it, and therefore it's probably not that famous. But it goes something like this: most businessmen lose their businesses because most businessmen lose their businesses because they're not willing to see what's in front of them. Yeah, goes something like that.
Yeah, that is it exactly, isn't it?
Yeah.
But if you can do that and create alignment of that throughout the business with your people, then it brings people together, brings them onto that same page. You know, this is what it is. So, you know, in order to create that accountability, if you like, you've got to get everyone involved, because everyone needs to be accountable, because otherwise, you know, they just turn around and say, well, the boss said this was the reality, we didn't really agree with it, and they slip into victim mindsets because they're going, well, it's the boss's fault.
Yeah.
So you've got to take people with you on that journey. You can't just I know that's kind of cliche, but you really have, if you want an accountable team.
Well, it's a persuasion game, isn't it? I mean, this is what you know, this is why it's called leadership. You know, leadership isn't about giving orders and getting people to follow your orders. Leadership is about getting people to follow you because they believe in the destination that you're trying to get to, and they want to go with you on that journey. That's really what, let's say, modern leadership is about, because there's just too many options for people to hold on to. So that's probably not very, that's not really explaining what I mean there, but there's too many ways of people avoiding their own accountability if you're the type of leader that just gives orders. That's what I'm trying to say. So it's about mapping out the journey and having the persuasive talent, the skills of persuasion to get people to come on that journey with you.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Exactly. So that's point number two. Yeah.
So point number three is you've got to own it. You know, and that's individual level and collective. You know, if it's going to happen, then it's up to me, or it's up to us, you know, depending on how that's, you know, pushed out into the business. But and that's not about market conditions or competitors or customers. It's about, you know, this is the reality.
Yeah.
This is what we're going to do, or you know, this is how we're going to change it. And that the fourth step is that solution driven piece where you're saying, well, actually, how do we change it? What are we going to do? What can I do? And what can we do to change that?
Yeah.
And then the fifth step is go do it, get on with it.
Yeah.
Don't procrastinate, you know, have that clarity and understanding of where you are, where you want to get to, what you need to do to get there, and execute it, deliver it.
Actually, just coming back to your point number 4, I was watching a video just last night, and the guy I was watching used this phrase. It was a video about marketing, modern techniques of marketing, and one of the things that he was talking about was, you know, how do you market yourself in a saturated marketplace? Well, of course, there's no market nowadays that isn't saturated, because there's so many people doing all the different things. And so every single market you could possibly operate in is a saturated market. And he said, and I thought this was brilliant what he said. He said, actually, there's no such thing as a saturated market. what there is there's lots of markets where all the people in it are just saying the same things
Same
about,
thing.
yeah. So it's like, if you find a way of differentiating yourself, then you're no longer in a saturated market, because you're offering something different and you're finding a way of getting that message across to people. And I think that totally relates to point 4. And I think it also it relates at a company level, but I think it also relates at an individual level as well. Because, you know, if you're working in a biggish organization, it's very easy to think that you've got nothing special to offer. You're just, you know, you've reached a level, you've got a comfortable salary, and it's like, you know, how do I stay safe? Whereas I think that mentality is a dangerous one to have nowadays, because the way in which the working environment is going, with so much stuff being automated, so much stuff going over to artificial intelligence, I think you have to have a way of defining and believing in the value that you bring. And that has to be true as a business. It has to be true of you as an individual. And you can't possibly get into that space of seeing the value that you bring if you have a victim mindset.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that links back to purpose, doesn't it? I mean, we talk about purpose with businesses and understanding how people connect into that purpose. You know, you know, that old story of, you know, the janitor at NASA who was spoken to by Kennedy. And understanding and going through that process, you're actually, by doing that, you're bringing people in and helping them understand what their purpose is to achieve that objective. You know, lots of people have lots of, you know, different ideas around accountability and how do they do this retrospectively. Like, we've got a plan, how do we cascade that down into the business? And of course, the only way you can really create accountability is by including people and getting them involved in that journey. Because otherwise they'll always feel like things are happening to them. You can't sort of reverse engineer purpose.
And what would you say to all of those business owners that are out there right now who would say, listening to this conversation, if they would even listen to a conversation like this, because they're the type of business owner who says, look, I tell my people what to do, and if they don't do it, they're out, you know, and it's my way or the highway. And it sounds like a Stone Age approach to business, but there are still people out there, and there's still a lot of people who run their businesses like that.
Yeah, we know them. I think this, you know, this 5-step process is a good process to do regularly anyway, even when you've not got problems, because it gets you ahead of that curve. And helps you, and it's a great way of aligning your business and aligning the members of the business to a common goal. And so, you know, my advice to those people would be, even if they just try and dip a toe in the water and run a session with their team, and find out what their reality is right now. They might not act on that.
My instinctive, I think my reaction would have been, rather than say try the 5-step process, it would be like, okay, well, good luck with that approach. You know, and you know, I hope it keeps working for you, and you know, and as long as it does, then great. But if you get to the point where you're wondering why you're working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and you don't trust your team and the team don't trust you, and you're starting to get fed up with that, then you might want to have a look at the 5-step approach.
Yeah, well, the business lives and dies with them, doesn't it, otherwise?
Yeah. Cool. So no more victims, eh?
No more.
Fantastic.